What's going on, everybody, and welcome to another Wheel of Time Diary, the fifth one of these, and the final one for book one of the series, The Eye of the World. I just finished this morning at the time that I'm recording, which I suppose I'll make a note of here, just so that you're aware. I've normally been recording these diaries on Wednesday mornings so that I can get them edited, rendered, and then uploaded to publish on Thursday mornings. That's basically the schedule that I've been running. I'm recording this final diary on a Monday morning on Memorial Day because I did finish the book this morning, which I thought was a little bit surprising, but I got more read yesterday than I thought I would, and I got a little bit more read today than I thought I would, even though I didn't get anything read on Friday. So I just had a pretty good reading week. It was a relatively short one. I only had, I believe, the 75 pages remaining in the book, so it wasn't anything too crazy. I spent around another 6.25 hours reading the book this last week, which puts my total for all 5 weeks and for the entirety of the book at about 33 hours total for the book at my reading speed, which is approximately 165 to 175 words per minute, as I have calculated over the last couple years. So if you are planning to read the book, or if you've read the book, that's about how long it is for me. Of course, there's audiobooks and those have a specific length, but just based off of my reading speed, that's how long it took. This week I did read chapters 42 through 53, so I did finish the book, and I would say in terms of the star rating, I suppose, that I would give to my reading this week, I want to give it another 5 stars, but there's just a couple small things holding me back. So I'm going to give this week's reading another 4 stars again, like I did a couple weeks back. And I'm not sure. I think a lot of that is because some of what I read this week started to run together a little bit. Maybe that's because I read large chunks and large bursts and took a long time before I wrote down thoughts on chapters, so some of the thoughts are getting a little bit mixed, but it also has to do with a couple chapters pretty much at the very end of the book, which we will get into very soon. For the spoiler-free, let me just discuss what I read this week. I don't think the conclusion was as bad as I was thinking that it would be based off of what other people had been saying for a long time. It wasn't I would agree with the notion that the ending was a little bit rushed, just in the sense that those last 4 chapters could have each definitely been at least a few pages longer than they were. So I think the book could have probably been another 20 or 25 pages pretty comfortably, and a little bit of me thinks that it might have been slightly better off for it, especially with chapters 50 and 51. But that's how I felt on that. I did not think the ending in general wasn't super confusing. There were a couple scenes of it that I'm not entirely sure about, but a lot of that was also because when I started reading this morning, I was really tired, and that happened to be chapters 50 and 51, which are the confusing chapters that I read this morning, so it wasn't great timing. I might actually go back over the next couple days before this video actually releases and reread those 2 chapters, 50 and 51, since I kind of know what to expect now, and just kind of go through and see if I can catch a little bit more, if I understand a little bit more of what's going on with them, because I wasn't paying the best attention when I was reading them the first time. So there's the element that some people have said that the ending is confusing, but also the fact that I was a little bit tired when I read the confusing part of the ending. So I don't think it was quite as confusing or bad or rushed or anything like that I was expecting for it to be, but there was definitely a little bit of that to it. But with that being said, the whole book, spoiler-free thoughts on the book for now, before I actually do a review here in a couple weeks, or about 2.5 weeks at the time of this video's release. Right? Or is that a week and a half at the time of this video's release? It's 2 weeks from tomorrow at the time I'm recording, so a week and a half from video's release. That's how time works. Spoiler-free thoughts, just briefly on the whole book. I really loved it. I think the comparisons to Tolkien, the comparisons to Lord of the Rings, Fellowship in particular, are overblown. I can see where some people might have complaints, where some things were kind of inspired by stuff, like the Ogier seemed to be inspired loosely by the Ents, for example. The Shades, or the Fades, sorry, are clearly influenced by or inspired by ring rates. Like, there's several elements in the book that you can look at and say, yeah, he definitely was inspired by and took a couple elements from Tolkien, but then he made them his own in his own world and used them in ways to tell a story that was maybe in some aspects similar, but that's just because you have a party of people traveling across part of the world. Like, are you going to say that literally any book that has a traveling party in it is rip off of Fellowship of the Ring? I just don't get that. But either way, I thought that the book was really good. I was expecting, the long and short of it is I went into Eye of the World expecting to experience about a 3-star read or so, hoping that it would be maybe 4 stars. What I ended up getting was a 4 stars at the very least, more likely 4.5 stars. But I'm probably going to round that score up to 5 stars just because of how surprised I was by it, how much I enjoyed the entire thing all the way through when I did not think that that was going to be the case. I expected for it to be a little bit rough around the edges, and while there were a couple of scenes, and particularly like a handful of very specific moments with specific characters that irked me a little bit, I would say nothing in the book bothered me enough to say, yeah, that detracts from the book. I mean, the ending is the closest that it comes to that, but with that being said, I suppose I can actually get into the spoiler-filled portion of this and talk about what I actually read in the last week, starting with chapter 42, Remembrance of Dreams. I really appreciated the scene that we actually got to see the whole party basically back together again. So we kind of got that a little bit at the end of where I finished reading last week, but especially with the group meeting in the library with Loyal the Ogre. I'm glad that the Ogres was going to be joining the group from this point forward. I liked all the interactions that were coming here, a lot of little bits of history that were being told and all of that kind of stuff. It was really nice. At the time that I read chapter 42, I remember I noted, I was like, okay, so the climax is probably going to happen in Camelin, I guess, for some reason, just because that kind of seemed like it was going to be doing. But then the book took a totally different turn because it introduced an element that I was totally not expecting in chapters 43 and 44, which was the ways. This sort of element that the ogres specifically are able to navigate because that's basically how they were built. Between them and male Aes Sedai way long in the past. That's my understanding of it. If I got an element of that wrong, please correct me. But that was basically kind of what happened. So the party traveled a little bit through Camelin in the dark so that they could get to a way gate, so that they could travel through the ways to get very close to the Blight, or approximately where the Eye of the World was supposed to be, because that was the goal. And I was glad to see that this happened, because I wasn't going to be particularly happy if the climax was in Camelin for some reason, based off of not just the title, but based off of all of the promises that were made throughout the entire book as a whole. So I was glad to see that happening. I liked all the travels that happened in the ways. Like, there was a lot of disconcerting, creepy sort of moments in those, including when there was a mysterious figure following them, which was kind of strange. The realization and learning that Trollocs and Fades had somehow managed to find ways into the ways, and pun unintended actually, that they managed to make their way into the ways and were starting to travel around them, and that the ways is how they were able to get to the two rivers, so to Emond's Field, and subsequently, most likely, how they were able to start surrounding Camelin, without, too much uproar being caused by it. Because that was a point that was made several times, was like, well, how did this many Trollocs end up here without the entire world knowing about it? It was apparently because of the ways. So it was kind of foreshadowed in a way, but indirectly. So the reveal of the ways and using them was actually something that I appreciated, and I think is a very interesting element that I wasn't anticipating, like I mentioned. So to see that those will probably get used in various different points through the rest of the series will be something interesting as well. Following the ways, the group emerges right outside of, a few miles outside of Faldara, which is apparently a place where Moraine and Lan have some history. And in these next couple chapters, we learn a little bit of history about Lan and about, kind of the stuff that has been going on here at the Borderlands for, however much time. And also where we learn that the peddler, who was also the peddler from way early in the book, like chapter 2 or 3 or something like that, who also happened to be the beggar in Camelin that Rand had noticed wandering around, which I don't think I noted last week because I didn't think it was important. Like, it was obviously important, but not important enough for me to mention at the time. But those people ended up being one and the same, and it turns out he was like a very, very, very strong dark friend, like steeped in the dark ways, so that he was basically just an entirely corrupted soul. It was also in the chapter that we learned a little bit about Lan specifically, that we learned some of the stuff that happened with Padam Fane, the peddler, and that was quite a discussion, quite a scene for sure. It was really disconcerting, but also makes me want to go back and, kind of reread a couple of those early chapters in Eye of the World and see if, I might notice a couple things that are off about Fane, the peddler, to see if, it was going to be obvious that he was like a dark friend or something. Because I know that in this chapter later in the book, characters like Rand and Matt and Perrin all said that they noticed that he was a little bit weird in the last few years, which was when he was specifically, given the task by the Dark One to search for somebody in, the Chosen One, basically, who would be the one to oppose him. But beyond that, the characters did start to head into the Blight. All the stuff that happened out here was kind of really interesting and disconcerting. I know I've said that word a few times, but it's true. The creatures that were described out here in the Blight were really strange, to the point that like the descriptions didn't make any sense and I couldn't actually even form images of them, and I think that might be intentional. Maybe I'll have to reread the descriptions and see if I can come up with a better mental image. I just know that they're not necessarily the friendliest appearing creatures out there. The fact that the corruption can be so deep in, say, like the trees and the bushes and the leaves of the trees out in the Blight, to the point that touching it can seriously damage or kill a person, is something that's a really interesting concept, and, makes the name The Blight rather fitting, actually. But it was going through the Blight and meeting the Green Man was a scene that I wasn't expecting. I know the Green Man had been mentioned several times up to this point, but I wasn't exactly sure what he was, who he was, and what kind of role he would play. He was just kind of this interesting figure that I think was underutilized both in the book, but will probably be underutilized throughout the rest of the series, given that he died at the end of this book. But it was right around here at chapters 50 and 51, like I said, that were a little bit more confusing, where there's like some stuff going on with some what were they called? Forsaken, I believe they were called. So some, I guess, right-hand men of the Dark One who had escaped the prison at some point and had tracked the party down to where they were at the Eye of the World, and Moraine was able to, incapacitate them, so to speak, with her magic. I liked that we got to see a little bit more of the magic coming through, but then some really confusing stuff happened with Rand that I wasn't entirely sure I understood, where he just suddenly teleported to the field. Where was it? I forget where the battle was that all of the Faldara armies were heading towards. That was basically the opposite direction of where the guys were heading. But Rand basically got transported to that battlefield and then used magic, which men in this world aren't supposed to be able to use without going crazy or eventually going crazy. He uses this and basically destroys the enemy army, which was a really cool scene, but I was still trying to get into the page, like trying to understand what was happening in the first place. So even though it was really cool, I wasn't entirely sure of the meaning of it until a couple chapters later. And then after that, Rand ends up in this void with like a string or a tendril of light coming from his body, opposite of the Dark One, who had a really thick dark tendril coming from his body. On the other hand, this confrontation was also really cool, but also didn't necessarily make the most sense. Like I said, I was a little bit lost in these couple chapters, so I might read them again, but I just know that the confrontations and stuff were cool, even if I didn't understand everything that was going on with them. But Rand's wielding of heavy magic to be able to at least temporarily defeat the Dark One here was really cool. But his, surviving and then coming to and meeting back up with the group and basically telling the women, the Aes Sedai and Egwene and Nynaeve, that he used the One Power, essentially, was a really let's just say it was a nervous moment for me because now I know that the way that the next couple books might end up going, at least with Rand specifically, might have to do with basically trying to avoid Aes Sedai in general, because the Red Asia is not going to be very friendly to Rand's, usage of that magic. So even if he does somehow manage to not use it very much, if at all, through, whatever means in the next couple books, which I know isn't going to be the case. Like, it's quite apparent that he's going to become quite affluent with magic. At least I would assume so. Based on that, I think that Aes Sedai are going to become a quite major adversary, at least, in the next few books when they discover that, because there's going to be some of them that don't want Rand to be using his magic. But I thought that the conclusion in chapter 23 was surprisingly fitting, what with Rand deciding that he wasn't going to go home, but he had to go anywhere that wasn't Tarvalon, again, because of the Aes Sedai problem. But it seems like basically everyone in the party is going to be heading to Tarvalon, but at the Eye of the World, apparently they got the horn, which is going to be most likely what book 2 is about, something about the horn and going to Ilion and stuff like that. Like, that's my prediction of where that's going. I'm kind of interested to see what happens in the next couple books, especially where antagonists and sort of enemies are concerned, especially since it seems like the Dark One, the Shadow as he was called, was basically incapacitated, at least for a time, and Moraine specifically gave a line that was like, the shadow won't rise for some time yet, or whatever the line was. I don't remember the line, I just know she referred to Baal-Zamon, or the Dark One, as the shadow in that moment. So my guess is that the Shadow Rising book 4 will be the book when he becomes a problem again, in which case, if that, guess happens to be the case, makes me wonder again what the next couple books are going to be about in terms of antagonists and who's going to be trying to stop the group from what. If my guess about Rand and the Aes Sedai is correct, I would anticipate that Aes Sedai are probably going to be one of the primary antagonists, at least for Rand, which will make for some interesting material in terms of relationships between members of this specific party, because I really like most of these characters. Nynaeve's the only one that I don't really care for, and that's just because she has no tact at all. And she's just annoying and has no tact. But most of all the other characters I really like, to some degree at least. I came to really like Lan over the last several chapters. I've pretty much always liked Moraine. I thought that Matt was an absolute idiot at a couple different points in time, but most of the things that I've disliked about his character in this book can be explained by the dagger that he picked up in Shadar Logoth. And Perrin's character I'm really interested in. I don't know necessarily whether I like or dislike it yet. I'm just really interested to see where some of those Wolf Brother elements go. I really like Rand. Like I said, I really like Moraine. I really like Loyal as well. So, I'm interested to see how some of these character dynamics go based off of who the antagonists and all the other stuff related to the plot in the next couple books go, depending on who the antagonists happen to be and what things are going down. So, with that being said, I'm very excited to be able to start the Great Hunt in July. In fact, if I didn't already have, videos made and planned and scheduled for all of next month, all of June, I probably would have usurped my TBR for no reason other than because I wanted to, just to read The Great Hunt immediately afterwards. But because I can't do that and still do the diaries and stuff like that, it would just mess up everything. I'm not going to do that. So that won't happen until July, and then I'll be reading The Dragon Reborn in September. I'm very excited for both of those. And a little bit of me is sad that I've made myself wait a month in between books, but I think it'll be better for me in the long run. With that being said, that is basically all that I have for this. Expect a spoiler-free review of the book, where most of what I said in the spoiler-free section of this video will be reiterated there, but with maybe a little bit more detail and with a little bit more points and stuff like that. I'll have a spoiler-free review in about a week and a half at the time that this video releases, so prepare for that. But otherwise, on Tuesday, I'll have a monthly reading wrap-up and TBR video, which is going to be a pretty big one because May was a crazy month for reading for me. In the next Thursday, what is coming out next Thursday? I actually have no idea what comes out on Thursday off the top of my head, so I guess we'll both be surprised by that. Otherwise, oh, and this Sunday actually is going to be another State of Affairs video, so that will be talking about plenty of the stuff that happened in May. And there's some pretty cool channel stuff that I want to talk about then. So if you're interested in that, you can check that out. If not, then my monthly reading wrap up in TBR, like I said, is coming out on Tuesday. So if you're excited for that, please stick around and you'll get that video on Tuesday. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll be back in the next video.